I'm Rachel Edidin.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we are the co-hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the XMen, a weekly podcast where we walk listeners through the ins, the outs, and the retcons of our very favorite superhero soap opera.
We also host Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men, which you're watching right now, where we go through the X-Men books that come out each week. This time is the week of September 24th, and we have 5 books. Where are we starting, Rachel?
Well, our first book up is Storm number 3, written by Greg Pak, drawn by Scott Hepburn with David Baldion, and colored by Rochelle Rosenberg. This is the third book of Pak's run, which continues to be strong. This issue, honestly, I don't think is as strong as the first 2, but I am biased because I got it stuck in my head that this was going to be the Yukio issue, and I think no matter what else happened, I would have been disappointed.
Nobody can live up to Yukio, as much as I love Forge.
I mean, if you have to choose between Forge and Yukio, you go with Yukio every time. This is sort of on basic levels, along with, like, if someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
I also think that the new artist is fine in this issue, but the artist that did the first 2 is just so perfect for this book. So for me, that hurt it a little bit. Yeah,
this is suffering from the same issue the same problem that Cyclops has, which is that the initial creative team set the bar so high that even though it's continuing to be a very good book and one of the best books coming out, it doesn't quite hit that standard. That said, Greg Pak is really continuing to bring it with a series that's consistently and beautifully used Storm as a vehicle to address some of the persistent paternalism and colonialism in X-Men, and continues to do that beautifully here.
Yeah, in this issue, Storm goes back to Africa, to where she used to be a, quote, goddess, and meets up with Forge. In a way, this series almost seems like a Storm's Greatest Hits series. It's going back to all of the things that have defined her as a character and her different roles in her life, and I really dig that.
Another thing I want to point out on this, and another place that's parallel to Cyclops, is that it's a book whose colorist is, I think, the best part of its art team at the moment. And I love Rochelle Rosenberg anyway, but she colors a lot of superhero books, and she doesn't get a chance often to do the stuff that she really stands out with, which is beautiful, moody, saturated colors, which she uses here to tremendous effect. And it's really nice seeing her really get a chance to run.
Next up, we have Amazing X-Men number 11 by Craig Kyle and Chris Yost, with art by Carlo Barberi. This is part 4 of World War Wendigo, a storyline in which everyone in Canada is turning into a Wendigo.
And I'd like to point out here that when they say world, they actually mean US-Canada border. So, you know.
That's pretty much the world for most of the geocentric, ethnocentric people out there, so whatever. On this hemisphere, up top. In those countries, basically.
I think most of those people don't even notice Canada.
Probably true. But anyway, so yeah, basically some human flesh has gotten into the food supply in Canada, so everyone who's not a vegetarian, I guess, has become a cannibal, and therefore Wendigo, which are big furry claw things.
Because that's what happens when you eat human flesh in Canada. And it's specifically in Canada, because at one point part of their plan is to take all the Wendigos across the US-Canada border, and they turn back as soon as they hit the States.
Yeah, they, like, dive across the border and turn into naked humans. It's very strange.
The mystical sociopolitical implications here are worth going into eventually, but not today.
So anyway, this is sort of an X-Men and Alpha Flight story. It's very reminiscent of the old Claremont days when Alpha Flight would show up for a while, or the X-Men would go to Canada and meet them. It's really fun in that regard, but also tempered by the sort of dark, violent elements that Kyle and Yost often do put into their comics. You do see that mix with their comics a lot. I wouldn't say this is a super memorable comic. This isn't going to be one of the great classic stories, but it is a lot of fun. I find myself smiling after I finish reading each issue. I think it's pretty decent.
Yeah, it's not the best it is at what it does. It's, you know, it's Albert, not Wolverine, but it's still, but with that said, it's charming. It's a fun book. So next up we have Savage Wolverine number 23. And remember that time there was an issue of Wolverine that we just ditched and reviewed Ms. Marvel instead? I really wish that Ms. Marvel had come out this week.
Yeah, this one is, I guess the best word I can think of for it is dull.
It's boring.
Yeah.
The writing is phoned in. It's not even really a story. It's like a rough scenario that we've seen a million times before with no new spins on it.
And I think that's a risk you can run when you do an anthology series with, you know, a single defining theme. In this case, Savage Wolverine is a comic with stories about Wolverine. That some of them are going to be really awesome, and others are going to be just really forgettable.
No, bullshit. Wolverine is a character who has had an interesting life, for whom there are a lot of really interesting angles. There's no excuse for this. This is dull. This is, yeah, I don't want to say I expect better because the quality curve isn't always great, but, you know, not everything has to be Arcudian Quinones, and I get that not everything's going to be, but there's really not a good excuse for a book like this with this character. The art is solid. Jose Villarrubia's colors are top-notch. This is, I think, one of 3 books this week that's really visually defined by its colorist more than anyone else, and that very well. And I also noticed Marvel's been giving colorists cover credits consistently, which, good on you. And yeah, there's just... It's not good, it's not interesting, and if we didn't have to review it, I wouldn't have bought it.
Next up, we have Magneto number 10, written once again by Colin Bunn. This time we have 2 artists, who are Javier Fernandez and Gabriel Hernandez Walta. And this book comes directly out of the last issue of Magneto, where Magneto had assaulted the Red Skull's essentially concentration camp base, gotten beaten down and captured, and in this issue he's basically being psychically tortured and is retreating inside his mind to different parts of his history to escape that.
One of the things I really like about the way the book uses 2 artists is that the Walta, who's by far and away the more sort of rough and less realistic artist, is the one who draws the real world sequences, not the dream sequences. The dream sequences are much more traditionally super heroic. They're much brighter, and in some ways they're a lot more realistic looking, and I think that's a really nice touch, and it really underlines sort of the dark moodiness of the tone of the series in general.
But what I do like is even those super heroic dream sequences, they all get twisted into nightmares when the psychic torturer dude shows up. And so there's a lot of really good surreality that I think serves this book well. I think this book has started to find its voice as it's gotten more weird and out there instead of being just about Magneto hunting bad guys. It's, you know, it should be a superhero book even if it's a really dark one, and that's one of the ways this works as one.
It's also done a really good job handling some very tricky subject matter.
Oh yeah, totally. It talks a lot about the Holocaust. Now, okay, having Nazis as villains, that's kind of easy. Nazis are bad guys. We hate them. They're terrible. But showing the Holocaust and the stuff that happened in it, even if you're not showing it explicitly, that's a very delicate, tricky subject, and this book manages to not Godwin itself, basically, repeatedly as it tackles it as this very important part of Magneto's past, and I think that's really worthy of admiration.
Last but not least, we have Cyclops number 5. If you've been following this series, then you know that this is the last issue of writer Greg Rucka's run.
Alas!
It's got Carmen Carnero continues on pencils, Terry Pallett on inks, and they're both doing a good job, but once again, yeah, I feel like if this series has a single breakout star, it's colorist Chris Sotomayor, who continues to do just a superlative job. Russell Dodderman, who was the first line artist on the series, really set the bar for the character art and the portrayals, the fight scenes. But this is a space book, and it's a space adventure book, and Sotomayor, above anyone else, has been responsible for really giving it that amazing otherworldly cosmic feel.
Yeah, so this is, it is the last issue of Rucka's run. It's also the last issue of the story arc.
Which saw Cyclops and Corsair stranded on an alien planet. They get a spoiler, they don't die there. This is an ongoing series. And as resolutions go, it's not a bad one. This, like Storm, is a series that shot itself in the foot very early on by setting a bar pretty impossibly high to hit again. That said, it remains one of my favorite books that Marvel is putting out, and I especially like the arc that Rucka's taken 16-year-old Cyclops across. This is a character who's never really gotten to play with identity and figure out who he might have been if he were someone else. And that's something that Rucka has really explored and continues to explore to great effect, and that I really hope that the series is going to continue to run with.
Also, highlights this time around, Apocalypse Now reference, and Corsair being super sexy and suave in a life-or-death duel with a female mercenary.
I mean,
I love this book.
Is Corsair ever not super sexy and suave? I thought that was his thing.
I'm pretty sure he's super sexy and suave
He's
even
like
while he
Space
sleeps.
Longshot, but with better hair.
It's hard to have worse.
Yeah. So yeah, terrific book. Really solid end to one of the best openings of any series that Marvel's put out in the last several years. And really hoping it continues. Also, shout out to Greg Rucka, who's done an amazing job on this book. Yeah, we will miss you, but we hope to see the series continue in the same vein.
Okay, so Rachel, what's our issue of the week?
I'm going to go with Cyclops number 5. It's a very strong end to what's been a superlative run. One that I think isn't just a good issue in its own right, but really encapsulates the strengths of this series so far.
Yeah, this is going to make a hell of a trade. It's going to be a wonderful self-contained first arc.
And a hell of an act to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So what's our panel?
Panel of the week is actually going to be from this week's issue of Magneto. Specifically, it's 3 panels. Magneto's gone into, he keeps going into his memories, like we mentioned earlier, to escape this psychic torture, and they keep going wrong. And in this panel, we see him holding his granddaughter. All of a sudden, he looks at her again, and it's just this torn-up wrapping. Then he looks over, and his children have been killed by these demon Nazis, and then things get even more demonic as the very human-looking Nazi who's been tormenting him has this demonic, red, evil face. I think it really works. For me, this is nightmare logic at its most effective, and that's something that this comic itself, Magneto, has been doing really well lately.
And that wraps up the X-Books for this week.
So, please check us out. Check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, which goes up on Thursdays at comicsalliance.com and on Sundays at rachelandmiles.com, on iTunes, and on Stitcher.
This week is all about Storm as the X-Men do some straight-up Barbarella cosplay. Madeline Pryor makes her first official appearance.
Madeline Pryor, yay!
Right, and everything goes to hell.
It surely does, because
Because
it's
X-Men.
Thanks as always to our Patreon supporters. These video reviews would not be possible if it were not for you guys. We love you, every single one of you.
Have a great week, and we'll see you after this week in the next week. They should really, really have a power couple name by now. Can we just call them Kyle Yost?
No. It would be like Coast or Yael. Yael, I like that one.
No. So I just want it to be a merge name. Do you think that when they write, they sort of merge like Station?
Oh, Station.
Station.
No, I think it's actually more like
Yeah.
in a Jaeger, they sort of go into the drift together, and they're in these sort of exercise, like, walkery things, and then their big comic writing robot writes the comic. I want a comic writing robot.
That seems like a lot of work.
Well, hey, you want quality work, you gotta put in the effort.
I really just want a sword button.